October 14th, 1943. At 25,000 feet above the frozen German landscape near Schweinfurt, the air was so thin and cold that it burned the lungs. Inside the shuddering metal frame of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Technical Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Mitchell pressed his forehead against the frigid plexiglass of his waistgun position, his breath forming a tiny circle of frost. Outside, the world was a terrifying tapestry of contrails, black flak bursts, and the sleek, deadly shapes of Focke-Wulf FW-190s. He watched, heart hammering against his ribs, as his own .50 caliber tracer rounds, a graceful, almost lazy-looking string of orange dots, arced through the thin air, passing a full 100 feet behind the yellow-nosed German fighter as it banked away, unscathed and mocking. The fighter rolled, its pilot likely unaware of the insignificant stream of lead he had effortlessly avoided, and began to set up for another pass. A wave of futile rage and self-recrimination washed over Mitchell. He had done everything by the book. He had led the target, just as the instructors had drilled into him back at the Las Vegas Army Airfield Gunnery School a mere 6 months ago. He'd practiced for countless hours on the skeet ranges and in the Waller trainers, learning to judge speed, distance, and deflection. Every lesson from basic training at Keesler Field, Mississippi, every principle of marksmanship that dated back to the rifled muskets of the Civil War was being proven catastrophically inadequate in this frozen hell, 5 miles above Germany. In 3 missions, he had fired over 4,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. He had not a single confirmed kill to his name. He was not alone. The other gunners in his squadron, good men from farms and factories across America, were reporting the same devastating lack of results. The mathematics of their failure were becoming an undeniable, chilling equation. American bombers were being blasted from the sky at an unsustainable rate, while their gunners were achieving a hit rate of less than 1%. They were, for all practical purposes, defenseless. What Mitchell could not know, what was impossible for him to comprehend in that moment of frozen terror and failure, was that a revolution was already underway. 2,000 miles away, in a collection of hastily constructed buildings at Eglin Field, Florida, a secret war was being waged, not with bullets, but with slide rules and probability tables. Teams of mathematicians, physicists, and ballisticians, many of them civilians plucked from universities and corporations, were completing revolutionary calculations that would overturn centuries of military doctrine. Within a matter of weeks, the very nature of aerial combat would be transformed. American gunners would be ordered to cease aiming at German fighters entirely. They would be commanded to abandon the careful tracking of individual targets through their reflector sights. Instead, they would learn to spray calculated patterns of bullets into predetermined zones of empty sky, trusting in mathematical probability over traditional marksmanship, in cold statistics over individual skill. And in doing so, they would begin to destroy the Luftwaffe at a rate that would shock Allied planners and send a wave of terror through the German high command. This revolution was a heresy. It violated every sacred principle of marksmanship that had governed military shooting since the first Chinese alchemists discovered gunpowder. It demanded the unthinkable. Forget maintaining a proper sight picture. Abandon the steady, practiced squeeze of the trigger. Ignore the instinctual tracking of a target through your sights. Dismiss every lesson from your instructors about leading your prey. The new emergent doctrine was born of desperate necessity. Fire thousands of rounds into completely empty space where no enemy currently existed. Trust the mathematical calculations of probability distributions and watch as German fighters, following predictable attack profiles, flew themselves into invisible, pre-positioned walls of lead they never saw coming and could not avoid. The crisis had reached its bloody apex on the infamous date of August 17th, 1943. On that day, a dual-pronged operation of immense ambition and staggering cost, known as the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, saw 376 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force dispatched to destroy critical German industrial targets. The plan, meticulously crafted over months, was to deliver a knockout blow to the Nazi war machine. Instead, it became a massacre. By sunset, 60 bombers had been shot down, their wreckage scattered across the German countryside. Another 95 aircraft were so grievously damaged they were effectively write-offs. The human cost was horrific. Over 600 airmen were killed, wounded, or captured. In the aftermath, amidst the grief and shock, a single statistic stood out as both incredible and damning. The gunners aboard the surviving bombers, in their after-action reports, claimed an astounding 288 German fighters destroyed, with another 27 listed as probables. It was a figure that suggested a fierce and successful defense. But post-war analysis of Luftwaffe records would reveal a devastating truth. The actual number of German fighters lost was between 25 and 27. American gunners were missing more than 90% of their claimed kills. They were, on average, expending over 12,000 rounds of ammunition for every single enemy aircraft actually destroyed. One of the few gunners to achieve a confirmed kill that day, Staff Sergeant William Crossman of the 100th Bomb Group, later known as the Bloody 100th, penned an after-action report that would become a key piece of evidence for operations researchers. His words were stark and revealing. "I engaged 12 different aircraft during the mission. I am certain I destroyed one. I saw it explode and the pilot bail out. The other 11? I might as well have been throwing rocks at them. My tracers followed them across the sky but never seemed to connect. It was as if they were protected by an invisible shield. We are doing something fundamentally, tragically wrong." The roots of this catastrophic failure were not in the courage of the gunners, but in the flawed interwar doctrine of the U.S. Army Air Corps. Influenced by the strategic bombing theories of Italian General Giulio Douhet, American air power theorists had convinced themselves that tight formations of heavily armed bombers, flying in daylight for precision, could fight their way to any target and back without the need for long-range fighter escorts. The B-17 Flying Fortress, a magnificent aircraft first flown in July 1935, was the physical embodiment of this seductive but ultimately fatal theory. It was designed to be an aerial battleship, bristling with 50 caliber machine guns, eventually 13 of them, creating interlocking fields of fire that were supposed to form an impenetrable hedgehog of defensive firepower. This elegant theory, thoroughly wargamed at the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, would cost thousands of American lives before it was finally abandoned. A few prescient voices had recognized the flaw from the beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Bowman, who commanded the flexible gunnery training program at Las Vegas Army Airfield, had written a classified report in January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor. With remarkable foresight, he stated, "We are training our gunners to shoot rifles at 300 yards, when what they desperately need is to shoot shotguns at 30 feet. The entire foundation of our gunnery instruction is erroneous. We are applying 19th century marksmanship principles to 20th century aerial combat. The boys we are sending to England are going to die in droves because we are teaching them the wrong skills." Bowman had intuitively grasped what physicists would soon confirm with rigorous calculation. The physics of modern aerial combat had rendered traditional marksmanship obsolete. When a Messerschmitt Bf 109 attacked a bomber formation from the 12 o'clock high position, straight ahead and slightly above, the combined closing speed could exceed 600 miles per hour. This meant the fighter was covering nearly 900 feet every single second. A gunner had, at best, a 2-second window from the moment he identified the threat until the fighter was a shrinking speck in the distance. At those velocities, the human eye could not track quickly enough. The human brain could not solve the complex trigonometric equation of deflection in real time, and the human hand could not respond with the required precision. The mathematical problem was unforgiving. A .50 caliber bullet traveled at 2,110 feet per second at sea level, but at 25,000 feet, in air only 1/3 as dense, its velocity and trajectory changed dramatically. The bullet had to arc through space while both the bomber, moving at 180-250 km/h, and the fighter, moving at over 350 km/h, were moving in 3 dimensions at different speeds and angles. The gunner had to account for the bomber's forward speed, the gravitational drop of the bullet over distance, wind resistance that varied with altitude and temperature, and parallax error, the fact that his eye was several feet from the gun's muzzle. This was a differential equation with at least 14 separate variables, a problem that would challenge a modern computer to solve in real time. Technical Sergeant James Morrison of the 94th Bomb Group, a former high school mathematics teacher from Cincinnati, spent his spare time between missions hunched over a notebook, trying to solve this very problem. His notebook, discovered decades later in the National Archives, was filled with page after page of frantic equations. His conclusion, scrawled in frustration across one page, read, "We are asking farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Detroit to function as human calculating machines. We are demanding they solve differential equations in their heads while being shot at by 20mm cannons. It is not merely difficult, it is a physical and psychological impossibility." The first crack in the wall of traditional doctrine appeared from an unlikely source in early September 1943. Master Sergeant Anthony Tony Kowalski, a diminutive ball turret gunner with the 91st Bomb Group based at Bassingbourn, England, had reached his breaking point. The ball turret was the most claustrophobic and terrifying position on the B-17, the gunner curled into a fetal position within a plexiglass sphere beneath the aircraft's belly, with no room for a parachute. Perhaps this constant intimacy with death freed Kowalski from the constraints of his training. After his 5th mission, he gave up on aimed fire entirely. Instead of carefully tracking fighters through his reflector sight, he developed what he cynically called the garden hose method. When German fighters approached, he would simply spray bullets in their general direction, walking his tracers across their anticipated flight path, saturating a volume of air with lead and trusting that the enemy would fly into it. His fellow gunners initially mocked him, dubbing him Spray and Pray Tony. But on September 6, 1943, during a brutal mission over Stuttgart, Kowalski's unorthodox method produced undeniable results. In a ferocious 4-minute engagement, he was credited with shooting down 2 Messerschmitt Bf-110 twin-engine heavy fighters and damaging a third so severely it was seen diving away, trailing smoke. During the intelligence debriefing, Kowalski, with his thick Chicago accent, struggled to explain his technique to the polished, Harvard-educated intelligence officer. "I wasn't aiming at 'em, not like they taught us," he admitted. "I wasn't tracking 'em in my sight or trying to figure the lead. I was just filling the air where I thought they'd have to be with as many bullets as I could and letting 'em fly into it, like they was committing suicide on my bullet stream." Kowalski's remarkable success, isolated as it was, caught the attention of Major William Becker, a former MIT physics professor now serving with the 8th Air Force's Operational Research Section, ORS. This unit, modeled on successful British organizations that had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare, was tasked with applying scientific and mathematical analysis to combat problems. Becker had been painstakingly analyzing thousands of feet of gun camera footage, studying the geometry of fighter attacks and bomber defensive fire. His findings, compiled in a report dated September 15, 1943, and classified most secret, challenged the very foundations of Air Force gunnery doctrine. Our analysis of 1,247 separate combats between B-17 formations and German fighters reveals a disturbing truth. Becker wrote, "The most successful gunners, those who actually destroy enemy aircraft rather than simply claiming them, are not the ones with the highest marksmanship scores from stateside training. They are not the ones who most carefully track targets through their sights. They are almost universally the ones who fire the greatest volume of ammunition in the shortest possible time, with less regard for traditional notions of accuracy. Traditional deflection shooting requires the gunner to solve an impossible equation to place a bullet precisely where the target will be. But what if, instead of trying to achieve this precision, we simply fill every place he could possibly be with bullets? What if we stop trying to achieve precision and instead pursue probability? The theoretical breakthrough was provided by Captain Robert Lindsay, a quiet, bespectacled statistical analyst who had been an actuary for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company before the war. Lindsay understood probability and risk in a way that traditional military minds did not. Insurance companies thrived by predicting aggregate behavior in large populations, even when individual actions were unpredictable. At a pivotal meeting at 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe on September 22, 1943, Lindsay stood before a room of skeptical senior officers, including the commander of the 8th Air Force, General Ira Eaker. "Gentlemen," Lindsay began, his voice trembling slightly, "the business of insurance is the management of probability. And so, it turns out, is the business of shooting down German fighters. We cannot predict what any individual German pilot will do, but we can predict with mathematical certainty what German pilots in aggregate will do. They follow patterns. They approach from specific, favored angles because those angles offer the best combination of firepower and survivability. They attack at specific speeds because physics and tactics dictate those speeds. They break away in specific directions because aerodynamics demands it. If we can map these patterns statistically, we can predict not where a specific fighter will be, but where any fighter is most likely to be. We don't need to shoot down specific aircraft. We need to fill zones of maximum probability with bullets and let statistics do the killing for us." The room erupted. Traditionalists were aghast. Colonel William Hall, a West Point graduate who had been teaching marksmanship since 1928, rose in fury. "This is absurd! You are asking us to abandon everything we know about gunnery, everything that defines a soldier's skill. You're telling our boys to close their eyes and spray bullets like they're watering a lawn. It is not merely wrong, sir. It is cowardly." But General Eaker, haunted by the ghostly formations that failed to return from Regensburg and Schweinfurt, was pragmatic. He authorized a full-scale top-priority test. The Air Force would commission a comprehensive study at Eglin Field, Florida, where the vast firing ranges over the Gulf of Mexico allowed for controlled, large-scale experiments. For 6 critical weeks in October and November of 1943, technicians fired millions of rounds of ammunition at radio-controlled target drones, meticulously mapping the probability distributions of successful hits under different firing patterns. They tested traditional aimed fire, barrage fire, and coordinated distributed fire. The results, delivered to headquarters on November 28, 1943, were unequivocal and staggering. Traditional aimed fire achieved a hit rate of just 0.5%, 1 hit for every 200 rounds fired. The new zone firing, or barrage fire technique, where gunners saturated predetermined areas of sky, achieved a hit rate of 4.2%, 1 hit for every 24 rounds fired. It was more than 8 times more effective. The implications were revolutionary. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 305th Bomb Group, and a man known for his ruthless, analytical mind, immediately grasped the significance. On December 8, 1943, the 2nd anniversary of Pearl Harbor, he assembled his gunners at Chelveston Air Base and issued a new doctrine in his characteristically gruff manner. "Forget everything you learned in gunnery school," LeMay commanded. "When a fighter approaches, do not aim at him. Do not try to track him through your sights. Do not calculate deflection. I want you to aim at the empty space in front of this formation where he has to fly in order to shoot at us. Fill that space with bullets. Create a wall of lead that he must fly through. Make him commit suicide on your bullet stream." The new technique was officially designated zone firing, or barrage fire, but the gunners themselves had more colorful names for it: spray and pray, the garden hose method, or most descriptively, filling the bucket. It required a profound psychological shift. Gunners were no longer to think of themselves as marksmen, but as components of a system, as probability weapons. The emphasis shifted utterly from accuracy to volume, from precision to saturation. The training apparatus across the United States underwent a seismic transformation. The 6 flexible gunnery schools at Las Vegas, Buckingham and Tyndall in Florida, Harlingen in Texas, Fort Myers in Florida, and Kingman in Arizona, which had been churning out thousands of gunners monthly, were ordered to overhaul their entire curriculum overnight. Instructors who had spent their careers teaching breath control, sight picture, and trigger squeeze were now told to teach statistical probability and pattern firing. Master Sergeant Frank Rodriguez, a gunnery instructor at Las Vegas Army Airfield, recalled the chaos. "We had these kids, and they were just kids, 18, 19 years old, who had been drilling for weeks on traditional marksmanship. We taught them all the fundamentals that go back to the Revolutionary War. Then, overnight, we're telling them to forget it all and just spray bullets at empty air. Some of them thought we'd lost our minds. Hell, some of us instructors wondered if we had." The new curriculum was a radical departure. Out went lengthy courses on sighting and tracking. In came classes on German fighter attack patterns, probability theory, and rate of fire maximization. The Waller gunnery trainer was reprogrammed to reward gunners for saturating a designated zone with fire, rather than for accurately tracking a specific target. The most counterintuitive aspect was a technique developed at the Central Flexible Gunnery Instructors School at Fort Myers, known as position firing. It exploited a fundamental truth of physics. The forward motion of the bomber imparted its own velocity to the bullets. If a waist gunner fired directly at a fighter attacking from the beam, the 3 or 9 o'clock position, the bomber's own speed of 250 mph would actually carry the bullets ahead of where he was aiming. The solution was heretical. Aim behind the attacking fighter. By aiming 30 to 40 degrees behind the target's apparent position, the gunner could let the bomber's forward motion carry the bullet stream directly into the fighter's path. It felt like deliberately missing, but it worked. This and all the other new principles were codified in a secret manual distributed in late 1943, titled simply, "Get That Fighter." It read not like a military manual, but like a physics and statistics textbook. It stated bluntly, "Believe it or not, when a fighter is making his attack, you don't aim ahead as in other shots. Always aim between him and the tail of your own plane, because the forward speed of your plane is added to the speed of your bullet." The manual contained detailed diagrams and probability tables showing gunners exactly which zone to saturate for every conceivable angle of attack. The impact on the Luftwaffe was immediate and devastating. German pilots, accustomed to dodging aimed fire, now found themselves flying into seemingly random but mathematically predetermined storms of steel. The favored head-on attack became suicidal. Ace Major Günther Roll noted in a tactical report, "The Americans have abandoned aimed fire for area saturation. Our standard attack approaches are becoming untenable. We are losing experienced pilots to what appears to be random fire, but is actually carefully calculated probability zones." The training machine accelerated. By December 1943, the gunnery schools were graduating 3,500 gunners a week, all trained in the new doctrine. The psychological adjustment for the gunners was immense. They had to suppress a lifetime of instinct and training. Staff Sergeant William Patterson of the 379th Bomb Group wrote home, "They want us to be machines, not marksmen. It goes against everything I learned growing up in Montana, but the math works. More bombers are coming home, so we close our eyes to what we see and trust what the slide rules tell us." The proof came during Big Week in February 1944. In that massive aerial campaign, American bombers using zone firing inflicted catastrophic losses on the Luftwaffe, over 350 fighters and hundreds of irreplaceable pilots, while sustaining far lower losses themselves. The German response was telling, A captured Luftwaffe directive from March 1944 warned pilots, "The American bombers no longer engage in aimed defensive fire. They create zones of impenetrable bullet density. Standard attack protocols must be abandoned." The revolution continued, culminating in the technologically advanced B-29 Superfortress and its computerized central fire control system, which automated zone firing, turning gunners into system operators, and completing the transformation of aerial gunnery from an art into an applied science. The legacy of this revolution extended far beyond World War II, forming the conceptual foundation for modern air defense systems, missile interception technologies, and the very notion of algorithm-driven warfare. The young men like Bobby Mitchell, who had learned to stop aiming and start trusting mathematics, had not only helped win the air war, but had ushered in a new era where cold, impartial calculation would forever change the face of combat. They proved that in the age of industrial warfare, the deadliest weapon was not the bullet itself, but the statistical certainty of its path.